Ron? Call the Committee of the Whole of Monday, August 19th to order. There's an agenda in front of you. Can I have a motion, please, to adopt the agenda? Councilors Ady and Randawa. Any further changes to the agenda? All in favor? Any opposed? It is carried. First item on the agenda is a presentation from Magna Engineering. Come on forward. Park yourself right in front of me there. That's perfect. Excellent. Yeah, turn the microphone on. Yep.
How's that?
Excellent.
Great. We decided this year that this would be a fun way to advertise. So this is our wastewater, our Magna toilet paper. Wipe your wastewater worries away.
Very good.
Thank you so much, everyone, for inviting me back. So I know everyone, but for the purposes of the meeting, I'm Jennifer Massig, CEO of Magna Engineering Services. And yeah, just honored to be giving you an update on this exciting project. With that, I have to find it, don't I? Oh, can I reduce these just to be difficult? I don't want to shut anybody down. Here we go. Fantastic. Okay, sounds good. You can. So the most important part, I think, of the first slide, when it gets it up for me, is now that we've gotten a little further through the process, and I will talk a little bit about our updates. I think the important thing to note on this is we're just showing that there's a very small area that we're going to be using for the pilot facility itself, and it's actually sitting right on the old tank location. So not in Moresby Park at all, but actually in the public utility lot that's right up against the gravel access road. So, and there was some reasons for doing that. So kind of in the blow up, I thought you can't really tell comparatively as you can on the previous slide about how small it is compared to the park. But here you get an idea of how close we're doing it up against that kind of gravel access road. What's really important for this is we actually were really hoping with this pilot, and this was something when we were looking at even other locations, sometimes it was a detriment that the public wouldn't be able to have access to it and see the exciting things that we're doing around here. So what we love about this location is you've got it right inside a hole where the old tank was. So you'll see a little bit more about that. You can see on the bottom right. I'm giving you a little bit of a teaser about what we're going to talk about a little later. But the benefit of that is on the access road, you actually look down on it. So you're actually going to get this opportunity to see the facility. So it'll be fenced off and things like that, but you're going to get the opportunity for the public to be able to see what we're up to. The small orange square there showing where the Headworks building, it'll actually be sitting hugged right up against that access road. So really important to note here, you're not going to see any disruption. There's a little tiny piece of pathway that during construction we probably don't want anybody on, but will be no disturbance to the park itself. So really important to note when we're looking at this image. So now I get to give you some fun teasers. We've gotten through the preliminary design piece. So this was actually, we kind of sat down because a lot of our current features right now all look like rectangles. So when we walked the site and really got a good look at where the old storage tanks were, you have a perfect little cliff hole in the ground there full of bedrock. And we were looking at optimization. We didn't want to have to work with the bedrock at all. So we actually came up with a circular design. An important thing to note too is as a pilot system, we're not taking all of the flow out of that pipe. So there'll be a substantial amount of wastewater flow in that trunk line. And we're actually just taking off a portion of the flow that will go into the pilot system. We'll do all the testing and monitoring of it, and it goes back into it. So when we're talking about any concerns about the system itself, overflow or anything else like that, it's not possible because everything's coming in and back out, and we're just pulling a small amount of flow. As we get into this a little bit, there's a bit of a kind of 3D image in there, and I can kind of show you a bit more how that works. But of importance, I think, when we're looking at this whole thing is what we're doing is we're just tying into the side of that existing trunk. It's important because we know working in Prince Rupert, we never know a lot of times what some of that infrastructure is going to look like when we get in there. So the intention of doing the pilot where we are is we're really minimizing the amount of risk of using much of that existing infrastructure at all. So that's really a big part of it. So really what you're going to see is two options for this. And this is really important because part of the work that we're doing here in this Prince Rupert system, which makes you guys unique on that coastal climate side, obviously, is the amount of stormwater and rainfall that we get. So the system is designed under two operations. So when there's a little less rain, so it's always going to be raining on this system, but we are talking about a low flow and a high flow environment. And we do see that in the flow monitoring. So in the more standard operation, which is more the regular rainfall event that we have in Prince Rupert here, what you're going to see is water is going to come into the purple boxes. And this is the vertical flow biofilter. So if you recall from some of my previous presentations, this first phase is where oxygen in sand, it's a sand media and it pulls oxygen with it. This is where all the secondary treatment happens. So we call this the thicker wastewater. And so that's where a lot of that treatment happens. Then it moves down through the system, and on the bottom of it will be the horizontal flow filter. So this is a saturated environment, so there's no oxygen there. And that's where we break down all the final nutrients. Those purple and red stages basically allow us to treat it at the same level that you would an expensive mechanical plant. So that would be the operation on the left. On the right-hand side, when you see storm operation, what we've designed into the system is a storm cell. Now, originally, when we were having these conversations with Environment Canada way back when, we were looking at these systems kind of being separate. Like when you had some of the systems are more combined and some are less combined in Prince Rupert, that if we had one that had a lot of stormwater overflows, we might do a bit of a storm system beside the other one. So what we've done here is we've integrated them. So using that small footprint, we've actually put the storm set in the center. So what'll happen in those high flow events, what we'll do is storm flows will actually come in through the middle where there's a much higher void space. So basically more gravel materials versus sand materials, and it goes through a bit faster. What's important for that is retention time is what we use for treatment. In those high flow environments, when you've diluted the wastewater with so much stormwater, it actually doesn't need the same amount of retention time as the more thicker, regular, standard operation wastewater. So what you'll see is it'll come in, it'll still go through the horizontal flow in the bottom. So everything always, if it comes in through the storm cell, it still goes through the horizontal flow in the bottom and then goes back into the system. But what this does, it just allows us, especially in our testing and monitoring, to really understand how the system is treating those higher flow and lower flow environments. We talk about this a lot, that there are neighborhoods where you have got some of that separation, but some of the benefit to this system is we want it to operate where you're not having to separate the system. So it's really important that we're putting in this type of operation. There is a third type of operation that would come into it. So just before I get into talking about this one a little bit, when I was talking about how flow comes in off the line, in an event that we have an extreme weather event, so we've got something that's beyond what we would consider high flow environments, that water will actually not spill into the system at all. It'll just continue down the trunk line. So the way that's designed is we're pulling off a slip screen off of that main trunk line. We are on purpose pulling some of that high flow, but once it goes beyond that, it just bypasses the pilot altogether. It doesn't even come off and go into the system. The reason for that is we're never in a situation ever where this will overtop, because we're only taking as much flow as we want for the system. So if it was to get to a point where it would actually not enter the system at all. So there's actually 3 conditions that it's designed for. Of note, you're never going to see standing water on top of this. What you're going to see is what you're seeing here. You're going to see mulch and trees. And as we go into, there's a little video I have where there's lots of piping that happens below surface. But this is really important. This is how we make sure that these operate in all weather conditions across Canada, from winter to rain, so that no smell or anything like that. Everything is happening subsurface. So what we're doing is we're looking at basically grain bins on steroids. It's not because I'm from Alberta that we're designing it this way. It's because it's circular. But let's just say we know how to design grain bins in Alberta. So we're going to see these circular facilities. They're going to be holding all the structure into place. We're going to be fencing it off so people can't access it. But what's great about it is the way that it's designed is when you're coming down the access road from the top, you're going to be looking at over all the trees. It's basically going to look like a planter's pot with trees sitting on the top is what it will look at when you're on the trail below. And when you're above, you'll be looking down onto the kind of tree bed itself. So to give you a bit of an update of where we're at in the project right now, we finished all of our pre-engineering work, and then we sent out the early contractor engagement project that you guys are going to talk about a bit tonight too. During that process, we moved ahead in the design just to the 60%. So what we are here is we want to get just far enough in the design that we can sit down, work with a contractor, go through, so we can change the design to optimize that area. The reason we want to do that is we're minimizing the amount of disturbance, and this is our first project working in Prince Rupert. So working with that local contractor that's got that experience, little things like we were walking the site and talking about pipes and things like that. And one of the McElhaney engineers were talking about, like, oh, one of these is an asbestos pipe. And he's like, uh-huh. We're like, what? What do you mean? He's like, they're all asbestos pipes. You just have to deal with these types of things. So there's a lot of those important things for us that we want to be working with our contractors that know the area and know how to construct in Prince Rupert. There's nothing worse than having a really great design that we just picked the wrong pipe because we're in the wrong area. So we really enjoy having our contractors be an important part of the process. So we're excited to go into that next phase. If decided by council tonight, we would look forward to that next phase. So at that point, we'll be starting to engage some of our sub-consultants. So the sub-consultants are like the structural guys, some of the building mechanical, some of the E&I work. So Magnus specialties in the process side of it, so the pumps and piping and all the environmental aspects of it. But we tend to sub-consult out some of those smaller pieces. So we'll start to bring them in. They're also local to the Prince Rupert area. So that's what we want to do. We do a lot of this work with McElhaney and then some other small outfits. At that point, we'll finalize the site layout. What I say by that is at this point in time, we've pulled together desktop background data and different kinds of things like that. But once we've got into the design process and done a little more work on the site, got things laid out, we actually might find that we want to do some adjustments once we're actually in the field and looking at where we want the system to sit. Also, sometimes when we get into this process, working with the staff, we might learn a little bit more about what's been going on in that area. We actually do have a flow monitor that's tracking flow in that area. So just before we get to that full tender drawing where we're actually getting out and getting the contractor aligned, we'll have checked all these boxes and just made sure that we've kind of addressed all the different things to really optimize the design, both for price and layout. So those are the two things that we're kind of working. We've got a set budget that we're working within, so we're trying to get as much as we can out of that. And if we can optimize a design, then that allows us to do a little bit more with the construction project. And then we're looking at tender in kind of mid-fall is kind of the line that we have right now for timing. And with that, I'm going to show you a really fancy engineering. So there are 3 videos in here. I'm going to skip the first 2. I know Richard's seen them all, but I was mentioning to Rose, I hadn't seen them both to the end, and they're quite long. So I think the third one is the really, really good one. So if you see me skip through a couple slides, I'm going to skip this one because the Headworks, unless you're really interested in pumps, this is the Headworks one. It's pretty exciting. But the good one is the one that I really, really want to show you, which kind of gives you an idea more that I believe, and we can go back and forth if someone's interested. But this really gives you an idea of how the storm cell and the different plants are going to work, different cells are going to work. Because all that we're going to see on the top are the trees. You can kind of see them kind of filtering in and out as the cross section moves through them, and mulch. But all of this infrastructure is what's happening underground. So on the top, below the trees, that's where we've got the sprinkler system that's kind of spraying the wastewater, and it's going to be about 2 feet below the surface. It sinks down through the system, and all the red infrastructure, the red piping, is where it collects it and sends it out to the different cells. So you won't see, all that you'll see is the steel around the back and the trees on top, but this gives you an idea of the amount of infrastructure that kind of goes in to the bottom of these systems. And even though it looks like there's a lot there, they're very simple. One of the things we always say about them is they kind of go together like Lego pieces because they can all be leaky. So when you need to do any maintenance or anything else like that, and you do have to kind of dig in there and make some changes, you can just take them apart and put them back together again. It was one thing that happened on one of our first projects, which I might have discussed in January. One of the contractors, we went to do the pressure testing on one of the pipes, had a broken pipe on the bottom. And it was a tough moment for everyone deciding what we were going to do with it. While we looked at the contractor and said, this is with you. Talked about sleeves and different kinds of things like that. Us as the engineers were like, we don't want to change the integrity of any of this piping. The decision was made to replace it, which meant they were digging through the whole media, replacing the pipe and building it back up again. And we got to video the whole thing, built it into an O&M manual. And in 3 days, I think that they moved, I'm trying to think how big that facility would be. It'd be like 100 meters by 50 meters of material. And I think it cost them about $25,000 in 3 days. And I'm talking about fine washed sand and pea gravel. So they slowly had to piece it apart, pull all the Lego pieces and put it back together. And that pipe was buried six meters below that infrastructure. So it was a substantial piece of work. The best time to watch something like that is when the contractor knows he's not getting paid for it, because it was fast, it was efficient, and we all got to watch it happen. So it was fantastic. And with that, that's the summary I just wanted to leave you with today, is kind of just give you an idea of kind of where we're at in the project. Oh, there's the pipes in the back end. So when we come to the bottom, these are the collection pipes on the as it collects these, then hands it into the horizontal flow biofilter. So there we go. We wanted to show you. So of note too, the 3D printing, the 3D models. So we model the entire system and then we cut them into basically 2D sheets for the contractor at the end of it. But often we can provide the 3D printing too. So of interest when we're going out to site throughout the whole project, this is something we'll also be able to contribute to the city for your data modeling too. So kind of know where everything is, which is really, really nice.
Great.
Yeah.
Good. Questions, Council? Councillor Adey.
I have three. The first one might just be my own ignorance. You said something about extremely high weather events, and that in that event, there wouldn't be anything going in at all, if I understood that correctly. And in a small scale, given that this is only a partial draw on an existing system, I get that. I'm just wondering what that looks like in the event that this is successful and we move forward, we end up with a full application. Does that, am I understanding that means that in those events, all of the wastewater as well as the stormwater simply bypasses everything? What happens with the wastewater in that circumstance in a more fulsome application?
Thank you for the question. And I will, sorry, I did say that incorrectly. It's still, everything up to that flow still gets treated. It's just the top flow that keeps going by. Now, it's diluted, so there's a portion of it. But when we look at the federal standards around how to treat, what we need to treat for wastewater, in those extreme conditions, it's actually kind of, you don't have to treat it to the same level you treat everything else. So our recommendation in the future when we do a large screen system would be to screen at minimum all flow, but not all flow needs to go through the treatment wetlands. So we would do primary treatment at a minimum of full flow at that extreme event. And that's how you would want to design. That's how most of these systems are designed from wastewater treatment perspective. It's what we're trying to do is not different than that. Yeah.
Second question. You've described a very limited footprint in this case. I guess my question about that would be, even though it's limited, is it a big enough footprint to give you and us the information that this will or won't work on a larger scale in this environment?
Absolutely. It is more than large enough for that. And I think even the opportunity that we have to do the multi-flow scenario, like it's big enough to allow us to do that type of scenario for it, allows us to collect two sets of data. For instance, when we were looking at the previous location, because of the arrangement, we weren't able to do both types of systems. So it was like a little bigger, so we got a little more footprint on how to do the standard operation scenario, but we weren't able to do both the storm and the standard operation on the initial location. Yeah.
The third question is probably the easiest one. The two videos that you didn't show,
Yes.
for those who are deeply interested in things like pump houses, will they be made available?
Yeah, I can just send you, I'll probably just send you all 3 video files.
Okay.
Be an engineer and slowly walk through the whole facility.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect. Okay, I've got a speakers list. Councillor Niche.
So when you explain the way it's built now, so when we talked in January,
Yeah.
I felt it was more like a kind of an underground system. And forgive me if I'm wrong, but the way I'm looking at it now is that it's almost like a round building that's above ground somewhat. So how far above ground? Like how big is that? I understand that it's in a hole, but how big is it just for scale?
Right now, I think it stands about 2 meters high.
Oh,
yeah.
That's not very tall.
So no, we're just honestly, it just really has to do with the fact that from a bedrock perspective, you end up eating up most of the cost if you end up having to dig into the bedrock. So it's actually a nice opportunity that you've got this perfect little hole, and you got an access from the walking path. Other than that, everything else is actually kind of like from every other view, it'll seem lower.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Cunningham.
In the event of repairs,
Mhm.
what happens to the system when it's down?
It's still in a multi-train model, so you can kind of see it. There's still 2 sets of cells of everything but the storm cell. So what we would do in a repair scenario is we would turn off the storm cell. So when you went above standard operations, those flows would just continue to go bypass. And you turn off the one that you're doing services on, and you just let the other operate.
Okay, now, is it not the Clearwater, but the Stephenville one that's 7,200? Or is it the Clearwater one?
Nope, it would be the Stephenville one. Yeah.
Okay, so that's half the population of Prince Rupert. So and that's just one wastewater. So when you're looking at all of Rupert, the way it's laid out with the outfalls and everything, how many would you actually need in Rupert to handle it? Could one do it, or would it have to be multiple locations?
It actually is it's an optimization game. So what we'd want to do is sit down with your team and talk around, you've got catchments that are all gravity feeding towards an outfall. If we had to turn some of those gravity systems into force mains, like so in the one side of the spectrum is you would take all of these systems that drain to the outfalls, you would force main them all to one location outside of town. So you take the cost of pumping all that flow to one location. That's one side of the spectrum. The other one is you don't change anything. You build a number of different, very, very small facilities, and you put them throughout the community in places where you don't have to do any force main. And then somewhere in between there is where we land. Where's the optimization of how much do we actually want to change and alter? So do we want a handful of facilities? Do we want a number of facilities? Or do we want one that's kind of in a different location and we direct everything there? And there's obviously cost benefit. Building one gives you lots of cost savings around just some of the scale, more specific to the headworks building, because you only have one pumping set of infrastructure. And so we'd look at that and say, okay, well, if we're going to do it this way, how much do we save in actually doing more of a force main from a number of different locations versus on the other side, you don't have to pay anything for going to the ground and changing any of the existing conveyance infrastructure, but now you're doing a whole bunch of tiny mini headworks.
So the actual wastewater coming out, not the sludge or anything, but the wastewater can go right back into the harbor, and it meets all environmental standards.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Now I noticed in both Clearwater and Stephenville that they're out in the country, or they're in large fields.
The one in Stevensville it's in town, like it's just more an industrial area, whereas the one in Clearwater, it's actually right beside the school.
Oh, okay.
It's just our views are always kind of looking west, but east behind it, it's actually servicing the small community around it, and then all of the septage receiving from the east side of the county. So it's right beside it's about, I would say, still like it's not right next to it. Let's see, it's 500 meters away from the small town, whereas Stevensville's in it. It just happens to be an industrial park.
So you could set these up close to residential areas and it wouldn't be a problem.
These act like your lift stations. So your lift stations you have throughout the community, and you look at what the setbacks and where you want those to be, they'll act very similar to that. There's no additional impact than a lift station.
And the interesting factor, I think, is the cost factor, not just the actual installation factor, which is a lot cheaper than going traditional, but also the maintenance, and as well as you don't have to have qualified water treatment engineers and things like this.
It's a level 1 system. So there's 4 levels. I think there is level 5 out there, but it's pretty crazy. So it's a big difference that it's a level 1 system. The other thing, Councillor Cunningham, that you brought up was talking around the remote access. We've toured with a lot of the operators around Prince Rupert, and having to replace mechanical parts is a nightmare.
Mhm.
So it is a big deal that, yes, you still got the issues around, you have a lift station. So there is some pumping infrastructure in there, but you're really talking about very minimal mechanical parts. It is a passive system in this type of environment. When you have an issue, it might be a plugged pipe. And we've dealt with those. We've dealt with them in our systems. Like if someone dumped a load of hydrovac into the system. Anything biological we can take. Really don't like sand and gravel. So we just had to go through and do a backflow on the system. We actually went out the day that it happened and just augured a couple extra holes to kind of induce some extra flow through the system. That was it. And that's why it's a level 1, because your operator can actually deal with the problem the same way a gardener or a farmer would go out and deal with the problem versus having to track down a piece of the mechanical equipment.
So 2 more questions and I'm done. Hydrocarbons in the system.
Yeah.
How do they work with it? Do they?
The best way to treat a hydrocarbon is biologically.
Okay.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of know that, but and then the other one is with our sewer and stormwater systems sometime combined.
Mhm.
How would we deal with that in the future if we get into larger?
Well, and this system is designed for that. So when I say standard operation and that extreme operation, we're talking about the environment where you have storm pipe flows.
Mm-hmm.
So that regular operation is dealing with, if you just had wastewater infrastructure coming to it, you had a certain amount of I&I or that inflow and infiltration, it's designed to handle all of that. That storm cell component is to account for actual storm pipe interconnection in that system. So when I talk about that third level of extreme flow, it's not the storm throw. It's the idea that you're having some of those major events. And we have to plan for those when we're talking about infrastructure. But this system is what makes the Moresby system different than the first location, is this one accounts for both.
Okay, and thank you very much for the presentation. I think you've explained to us.
Councillor Randawa.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, thank you for your presentation. Yeah, you cleared our most doubts, questions, and concerns. So thank you.
Great. Any other questions from council? I think in the January presentation you talked about the need to fallow.
Right.
And so does that happen within that circle?
Exactly. The 2 trains that you do have the opportunity to turn one off.
Okay.
And even and that we were talking about in the system we have in Clearwater, when we did have an overdose of had a lot of septage come in one weekend, because it's interesting on this system, we deal with high dilution. There they deal with the opposite. They have a weekend, which is like May long weekend, and they get so much septage flow that it's super thick in that system. And when that happens, we see a slowdown. We actually turn the train off, let it sit for 2 weeks so that it can actually slowly biologically break that down and then turn it back on again. And so always dealing at least minimum of 2 trains, and your system is a 2-train system.
Perfect. Yeah. Very good. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you.
All right, Council, the next item up is a report from the Director of Corporate and Legislative Services with regards to governance policies. We are pulling policy number 1 out of it, so there are just 2 for your consideration. So item 1 is, you can strike through that, and items 2 and 3 are here for your consideration. My only comment on these is that, as I've often done on other policies, I actually question whether the disposal of found goods is a council policy. I actually think that should be just an organization corporate policy. Dr. Buchanan, you've got a comment.
Your Worship, I think that's council discretion. If they want to delegate it to administration to be administrative policy, council can simply do that now.
Perfect. All right. Councillor Cunningham.
How does that tie in with the Community Act?
Sorry, are you talking about community enhancement grants? So community enhancement grants, I do think. Okay.
Your community charter? I don't see any conflict there. I think it's just a simple delegation.
Right. Any comments from council? Would you consider a motion to make the disposal of found goods an administrative policy? Okay, Councillor Nish, Councillor Skelton Morvan. Any comments or questions? Okay, on the issue of making the disposal of found goods and administration policy, all in favor? Any opposed? It's carried. Then on policy number 3, governance 280 or 28 2023, community enhancement grants. Does somebody want to move that policy? Councillors Cunningham and Nish, any further discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? It's carried. These are all just recommendations to the to the regular council meeting. With that, if there's no questions or inquiries from members of council, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. Councillors Randawa and Adi, well, there's no discussion. All in favor? Any opposed? It is carried, and we will move into the regular council meeting. And I will call the regular council meeting of Monday, August 19th to order. And you're certainly welcome to stay in the room if you want to, but you don't feel obliged to stay for all of council's meetings. You can do whatever you want. All right. I don't believe there are any late items. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda? Councillors Nish and Skelton Morvan. Any additions or deletions? All in favor? Any opposed? It is carried. We have resolutions and or recommendations from the committee of the whole. There was a recommendation, 2 recommendations. One, of course, to put the found items policy as a administrative policy, and the second one was to adopt the community enhancement grant policy. Can I have a motion to cover both those? Councillors Adi and Randawa. Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? It is carried. Public comments regarding items on the agenda. This is your opportunity, members of the public, if you want to come forward and address council on any item that is on tonight's agenda. Mr. Saka. Is your microphone on? I just want to make sure that. Perfect.
Oh, my name is Terry Saka. I'm a taxpayer of Prince Rupert. Have been here since 1960. Lived on Park Avenue for approximately 35, 40 years. Spent a lot of my childhood at Moresby Park. And what I want to talk about is the lack of public input into the project at Moresby Park. I commend the previous council that they removed the oil tanks that had been there since the Second World War. And now I see another project that is going to impact a park area that should be looked at green space in Prince Rupert for the future, not a sewage treatment plant because we want to build one. Interesting presentation. I'm quite familiar with effluent treatment plants. I worked at the pulp mill, was part of the commissioning group on the effluent treatment plant that was out there. I fully understand the mechanics of it. I understand the biodegradable part of it. I was on the downstairs this afternoon were kind enough to give me
Sorry,
some
excuse me,
thoughts.
Mr. Saka. Could you turn your mic back on? No,
Okay.
thank you.
The people downstairs this afternoon were kind enough to give me some pictures of the one in Stephenville and the one in Clearwater. And it's kind of interesting that I don't see any houses or residential area in the Stephenville pictures. Nothing, no trees, no nothing, just an open field. And it's probably operated on the same basis as a septic. In the Clearwater, same thing, miles and miles of open space, no trees, a pump house, and a pump house located in Stephenville. So when you have pump houses, you have to have somebody there that monitors these things. They don't run by themselves. Though some people think that they do, they don't. I'm a millwright. I've been a millwright for almost 40 years, and I'm quite aware of that. Things don't always work the way they're supposed to. So if there's an overflow, if we have a bad time and we have lots of rain, if there's an overflow, how do you profess to deal with the overflow? Because right across there, and there's been no mention whatsoever, that there's a salmon-bearing creek that empties into Mooresby, as we've known it for years, Mooresby Dam. So how do you control the containment? Well, maybe you could enlighten me because I didn't hear that. I didn't hear no mention of a creek across from the first oil tank containment. So in the mid, so again in the middle of the night we get some pretty good rain. So how do you contain that? What mechanism comes into place and says, okay, hey, we got lots of rain coming in here, bang, stop. What does it? What? Well, for Your Worship, you know, if this was a public hearing, that's what. No, if this was a public hearing, that's where we would be discussing these things. But there has been no public hearing, even though Mr. Pucci at the last council meeting, when I was here, asked question, said there will be a public hearing.
Mr. Saka, let's be really, really clear. Words matter. There was never a promise of a public hearing. What was discussed was there will be an opportunity for public engagement, and that is coming. But it was also very clearly said at that previous that the public engagement could only follow after the design. So until we know what we're talking about, we can't engage, right? Once we have a design, once there's some idea of how big this thing's going to be, where it's going to sit, what's it going to look like, then we can have a public engagement. And that is coming. It was promised it will. But not a public hearing. It's a very different animal.
Well, you may buy me into that, but at the same time, you're issuing out tenders for construction.
For design.
Well, I'm reading it as construction. Sir contractors?
For design.
Through,
We're not going to go back. Keep going. You express your concern, and they will be made.
so my concern is this is not the place. This is a park. This is not the place to have a sewage treatment plant. Not the place. All these places here, there's no residences. Mr. Councilor Rongao will have a perfect view from his back porch of what goes on there. To facilitate this, there's going to be a need for a pump house. There's going to be removal of trees to facilitate a pump house. there's going to be, obviously there's going to be nobody there. So there's going to be some mechanical means, I'm assuming, to, if we get high water, that a gate's going to open and divert the stuff all back into the sewage plant. I haven't heard anything about the solids, because our sewer system here is unlike everywhere else. All our sewage goes into the one pipe. So what happens with the solids? Again, another question. I've inquired about a treatment plant that was built in Victoria, and actually I was just down there, and I talked to some people that Victoria residents, and it was going to be built next to a school, about 2 blocks away from the school. The public there said, no, you're not building it there. So it got built down, it's below the prison, and it's created a real problem there because of smell. So the residents up there are up in arms. And again, what's going to happen with the solids? That has not been addressed. Okay. And again, there's been no public involvement. There's a fish bearing creek there, and you're saying there's never going to be any spillover to affect that creek. Well, you know what? I wouldn't put my name on it. But if you want to leave a legacy for Prince Rupert that we build a sewage treatment plant inside a park, well, so be it. But I don't know where you were here when we had CNR Park, and the proponents at that time sold the bill of goods to the citizens of Prince Rupert that there's going to be a mall there, there's going to be green space there, there's going to be sitting areas there, on and on and on. Well, you look at that. You look at that, and all the people that convinced the people in Prince Rupert that was going to be a good thing, they're gone. They took their money, stuffed it in their pocket, and they're gone. Just like this thing here. The contractors and the people that are selling you this bill of goods are going to put the money in their pocket, and they're going to be gone. And us who live here and have lived here for a long time are going to get stuck, excuse the language, with the shit. As a taxpayer, I'm getting tired of it. Damn tired of it. Outsiders coming in here and come up with these dreams, ideas, and we get stuck with it. Would you want this plant next door to your house? You would? You don't have a house. Thank you.
Anyone else that would like to approach?
I just wanted to ask a question about the Schwatland Road water line. I noticed the last point on the bullet list there is that at this time, due to costs, the road will not be reinstated. I guess I would appreciate some context there, and perhaps what that then looks like in terms of access to the industrial park and long-term planning for a road to go through on that route.
Your worship, I'll defer that to the deputy city manager.
Thank you, Your Worship. So at this point right now, due to costs, we're contemplating not putting back the road. It's several $1 million worth of infrastructure that would have to go back. At this point, we believe that money is better spent in actual pipe replacement. The road can be put back in the future at the width that's required. The road width that was there before didn't meet standards to today's standards, so it would have to be widened, which was extra cost. So at this point, we've made the decision that we would be putting it into more pipe infrastructure moving forward. There is opportunity in the future, obviously, to put that in through development or through future budgets, but at this point, that's where we're at with that.
So the only access.
I was actually going to bring up the same topic. I've had conversations with a few people from the industrial park and just people in general. I think it's probably a little short-sighted to cut that off. I understand there's a cost to it, but you have to look at who uses the industrial park. You have loaded semis trying to climb a steep hill, whether it's in the winter. I've talked about traffic with people where right now they say work in the industrial park and they want to go home at lunch, and there's a semi trying to turn left to Terrace. The highway's busy, and they're being impacted for substantial amounts of time because at the top of the hill there's one rig waiting to turn left and no one can get past them to get back to town. And so I've had quite a few people raise issue with this. In the wintertime, it's a very steep road, and if you have one semi stuck at the top and he can't get out of the industrial park, you are essentially blocking everyone from getting out of there. So I think it really needs to be looked at from another look at it, because we don't need a fancy road with sidewalks, but a paved section like it doesn't need lights. It just needs a paved section, a secondary access to a very critical part to our community. And I've had a lot of people talk to me about this one, and I agree with a lot of the statements that it would be very impactful, especially in treacherous winter conditions on that road. And I believe that we're the ones plowing that road, and if we're not doing a good job of that, for whatever reason that morning, and there's something happening in the blockage of that road, it's going to be chaos.
Councillor Cunningham.
I had that in my notes also, not just coming out of the industrial park onto the highway from the industrial park at that end, but on Frederick. You've got people coming down Frederick now. You've got more traffic there. At Frederick, you're making a left-hand turn onto a busy highway sometimes, and you're getting a line up there as well. It's enough of a slope in the winter that if there's a bit of ice or that there, it's going to be a problem with the trucks. You've got a lot of vehicle traffic coming from the east side of town using that route, and they used to just go up the old Scotland Road. So I think it's something we definitely have to look at. It's it's going to be a very big inconvenience. It's just like the inconvenience from 6th Avenue Bridge right now, which is something I want to bring up, but it's not on the projects. But when school starts, pedestrian traffic across 6th Avenue Bridge, there's a lot of kids that walk to Lehane from that part of town, and it's going to be a problem.
Yeah.
And I don't know exactly how it's going to have to be addressed, but you're going to have to look at some time between 8:30 to 3 to 3:30 that access, pedestrian access on 6th Avenue Bridge should be looked at. But my other thing is 9/11 in the fire department. I'm getting a lot of people complaining about phoning 9/11 for an ambulance. We have a 9/11 service here, but it's being rerouted to Kamloops, I believe it is. And, I had a personal example of a lady that fell out of her chair at McDonald's, hit her head, went unconscious. they waited over 40 minutes for an ambulance. And when I phoned back the second time, they were asking me a dozen questions about the woman I didn't know. And they didn't know the address to McDonald's. When I said 11th and Highway 16, well, what's the address? We can't dispatch an ambulance till we know the address, which to me is just straight BS. You know, like if we've got a 911 dispatch in town that we are using and paying for, why is it not dispatching the ambulances instead of somebody in Kamloops that could just as easily press a button on a computer screen and figure out where McDonald's and Prince Rupert is? But it's delaying, especially ambulance calls. I believe our fire department still dispatch from there. I don't know about our CMP, but the ambulance calls, the EMS has to be addressed in one way or another.
Okay, so 3 issues there. I want to back up and not losing any of them, and go back to the Shawantlands Road. Dr. Buck.
Your Worship, we hear council's concerns about the loss of that Schwatlands access. My read on this is it's a budget issue, and that there's likely not sufficient funds to do the water replacement plus that. However, having said that, we will take a look at it, and we can come back to council with what the budget implication is, and if there's necessary funds, additional funds for keeping that road open and improving it, we'll discuss what that means at a budget level with council. And with respect to the 911 issue, we'll ask the fire chief to provide an explanation and email it to council.
Yeah. Yeah. It all, I mean, good, and we'll get that, but it all has to do with the way the ambulance service insists on dispatch rolling, and so it can't be done locally. But I think we can make an issue of it, and we certainly shouldn't sit by idly.
UBCM.
Maybe a UBCM issue. Yeah. Before we do that, when we come back to council on the Shawantlands Road, one of the things that we'll want to be really clear on is, if we're replacing the road, are we required to do it differently than what it is? Right now, we've got a glorified goat trail, right? It's not a recognized roadway, and so I think one of the things that council will need to understand is, are there requirements that, a little bit like once you renovate your house, you get to a certain point, you have to meet new codes, all that sort of stuff. So that would be helpful. And then finally, 6th Avenue Bridge, Dr. Buchan.
Defer to
DCM Pucci.
DCM Pucci.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So what we'll do is we will talk with the contractor to see if we can have some pedestrian access open during school hours, just before school and at 3 o'clock, and hopefully that won't affect their production. I think, I'll talk to our team and see if we can look to accommodate that. That was always something we wanted to do. We're also working with them on efficiencies to see if we can get that timeline scooted back a bit. We lost a few weeks there, but we're trying to gain that back.
Thank you. Councillor Cunningham.
Back to the 6th Avenue Bridge. I didn't personally see it, but evidently people are crossing the bridge at night. And I don't know how we can stop them, but it must be some sort of safety factor. One, with the bridge torn apart, the equipment on there and things like that.
I brought that to DCM Pucci's attention this afternoon. DCM, have you got any? In case everybody's wondering why I'm saying DCM, he's deputy city manager, and I just refuse to keep saying that over and over and over. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, so we brought that to the contractor's attention this afternoon after the mayor brought it to my attention, and they will be tightening up security, making sure that at night it is fully secured. Thank you.
Councillor Niche.
I don't know why we're talking about this now and not at the end of the meeting, but anyways, we'll go on. We'll continue on. 6th Avenue Bridge. I mean, is there a way that we could maybe even weed whack the old road / trail that goes from behind, or basically behind Petro, from the bridge down to the waterfront to allow people to walk through that? Is that a possibility? and just bringing it up as something to discuss.
DCM Pucci.
I don't even need an
Nope,
answer right now.
nope, good.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through the mayor. So we've looked at that. There are concerns about that route. There's people in there. There's no lighting in there, and it's absolutely not to any real standard that we can have the public in there unattended. It's quite dark, and so we've actually walked that and tried to figure out if there was an option there. But unfortunately, at this time, we can't. But we are going to look to provide better access. We'll talk with the contractor and see what we can do. Thank you.
And the reason we're talking about it is because it's actually in the report, in the consent agenda. So, yeah, it is. All right. Any other questions regarding any item in the consent agenda? All in favor? Any opposed? It is carried. Thank you very much. We now move on to reports. We have a report from planning with regards to DVP 2405 for 412 4th Avenue East, with recommendation that council proceeds with the final approval for development variance permit DVP 2405 for the porch enclosure located at 412 4th Avenue East. Can I have a motion to that effect? Councilors Cunningham and Niche. There is one piece of correspondence that council has been provided with. Dr. Buchan, were there any other?
Not that I'm aware of, Your Worship. No.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions or comments from council? Councilor Cunningham.
Some of these concerns, can they be addressed, or they seem to, like, what about the traffic? Parking seems to be a bit of a problem, and I've noticed that on that particular area, it's kind of tight with parking and that. And all along 4th East there, it is a definite parking problem.
Dr. Buchan.
Your Worship, I think staff have a copy of this, and if there's something that's reasonable to do, staff will look at it. But it's a setback variance, and that there's the connection between that and parking is
right
questionable.
Right. Yeah. And that's it's interesting because some of the questions that are being asked are fair, but they really don't relate directly to the setback, right? And the setback is what we're approving the variance for. Any other questions or comments? All in favor? Any opposed? It is carried. Report from Planning DVP 2406 for 836 3rd Avenue West. Council proceeds with final approval for development variance permit DVP 2406 for the porch enclosure located at 836 3rd Avenue West. Can I have a motion to that effect, Councilors?
Your Worship?
Skelton Moore. Yes.
I think we need a small clarification on what the intent of this variance is, and Director Pope can speak to that.
All right. Can I get a mover seconder before we? Yeah. Councillor Skelton Moore and Councillor Randawa. Go ahead, Director Pope.
Thank you. So this variance is actually for a height variance for the Lac Wallum proposal on 3rd Avenue. And it does need, council is not able to approve this variance unless the official community plan amendment later in the agenda is approved first. So the order of those items should just be reversed there.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. It did not make sense to me even as I read it, but I read it. So for the interest of the public, and so we're crystal clear on what we're doing. This is the height variance for the Lac Wallum's building project on 3rd Avenue West, which would be kind of across from current location of Save-On in that general area. Thank you very much for the correction. So I will reread the recommendation is that proceeds for the final approval for development variance permit 2406 for development. Oh my gosh. For the height variance. Sorry?
Official community plan change first, then we have to come back to this.
Oh, do we need to,
Your Worship,
reverse
yes,
the order?
I would please defer this to following the adoption. Of that
Got it. Thank you very much. Okay, so pulling this one and then coming back to it later. Is that correct? Are we correct? Coming back later. Thank you very much. Then we will move on. Item 7C, it's a report from planning with regards to development variance permit 2407 for 721 La Botaniere Street. recommendation that council proceeds with the statutory notification process for development variance permit DVP 2407-721 Labotin, I can never say this right, Labotiniere Street.
Lot Veneer. Lot Veneer.
Lot
Veneer.
Veneer. There we go. Thank you. Not Lobotomy Street. No, okay. All right. My apologies to all the good residents. Can I have a motion, please? Councillor Cunningham, Councillor Randawa, to proceed to notification. All in favor? Any opposed? It is carried. Oh, that you're opposed? Okay. Did you want to state any?
Yeah, I mean, this is a lot of this stuff is already built, and here we are going back again, and it's ask for forgiveness later, and I just hate the fact that that happens. This stuff should be approved before building, and I hate to see when it comes to council after it's already been built, and so I'm opposing it on that.
Dr. Buchan.
Your worship, we certainly understand that point. There are additional fees applied because of this is work after the fact.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Councillor Cunningham.
Was this built properly with permits and everything?
Dr. Buchan.
Your worship, I'm going to defer that to Director Pope.
Director Pope.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Initially, it was built without permits. Our building inspectors spotted it and issued a stop work order, and the applicant received some permits, but requires these variances in order to proceed with the rest of the building permits that are required.
So it's built to code, in other words.
Rather, it was built without a proper building permit. Occupancy has not been received yet. So at occupancy, it will be confirmed that it is at code, but they've been following inspection. So far it's to code, but code is determined at occupancy.
So yet to be determined, I think.
Yes.
I tend to
Way to
agree
describe
with Councillor Neese on this.
All right, Dr. Buchan.
Your worship, I understand that to at this point, up to this point, it is at code, but occupancy will not be issued until building inspectors are satisfied that it's all to code. The variance allows us to complete.
All right. Any other comments or questions? Anybody want to change their vote? You're opposed? Okay. So it still passes. 2 opposed. Thank you. All right. Item number 7D, report from the Manager of Communications, Engagement and Social Development with regards to a memorandum of understanding for collaboration on Emergency and Disaster Management Act funding. That council approves the memorandum of understanding to work with the District of Port Ed and North Coast Regional District on meeting the new Emergency and Disaster Management Act requirements for Indigenous engagement under the new provincial legislation. Can I have a motion to that effect? Yep. Councillor Adey, Councillor Skelton Morven. Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? It is carried. We have a report from the Deputy City Manager with regards to wastewater pilot program construction consulting services that with a recommendation that council receives the report and award construction consultant services to spur RFP 24012 to spur construction. Councillor Skelton Morven, Councillor Niche, any discussion? Councillor Cunningham.
Question here is Spur Construction, who we're thinking of giving the contract to. It says, is that exclusive disbursements in parentheses there? Like, what exactly does that mean?
DCM Pucci.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's excluding disbursements. So there is some travel that's in there, but it still does come in under as the lowest bid. But the way it was packaged in the RFP, it was exactly like that, 22 plus, excluding disbursements.
So what is the cost of the disbursement?
The cost was about $6,000, but if they required any additional travel or anything else, it could be a little bit more, but it was still under as the lowest.
So if they're requesting any extra we're going to be at least the same as Broadwater or higher. And Broadwater is a local company.
Director DCM Pucci.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That is correct. There was several scoring categories that it was based on. So there was if you've done it in the past, and so there was, it's in here as well, that it went on project team experience, qualifications, relevant project experience, past experience with City of Prince Rupert, which these ones don't have anything, but some of the other scoring categories scored higher because they have built these in the past and they've been a part of this process in the past.
But you're asking us to award this contract without a final price.
Director DCM Pucci.
That is correct. What would happen is we would manage that, and at this point right now there is some travel involved, and if any additional travel was required, then that would be an additional cost onto the project. Correct.
So it could be higher than Broadwater Industries in the end.
That's a potential. Any other questions or comments? Councillor 80.
I will just counter that a little bit. It does seem to me that the most important consideration that one makes when you want somebody to do a job is, can they prove to you that they can do that job? I'm confident that all three proponents would get the job done, but the only one that has actually done the work, I think it's Estevan, Saskatchewan, would be the Spur Construction people. So given that, I think that's probably a pretty persuasive criterion.
Councillor Cunningham.
Well, seeing as this is a pilot project and there's going to be more of these projects coming along, so then where are you going to get the experience if you don't give it to a local contractor to figure it out? So, that's a double-edged sword as far as I'm concerned. I would defer to Magna to see if they think Broadwater is qualified to do it.
Dr. Buchan.
Your Worship, when we go out for tenders and prices, we put out the criteria with which the proposals are judged. It is problematic and can attract unwanted controversy if the criteria are amended by council in the award discussion. If they meet the criteria, if we go through the process and they're awarded, there needs to be we might have to redo the proposal, the whole process, in order to come up with reconsider a different award. I recommend that council go with the recommendation because it's being done in accordance with the stipulated criteria.
Councillor Skelton Morven.
I wanted to add some pieces around that, and as much as we as an organization would like to support local businesses and things like that, but this being something completely different that hasn't been done in a climate and setting of our particular standards, I think for that I agree with Councillor 80 that the experience will go miles in this particular endeavor, because we've learned in the past that going for the dollar for dollar value and then having things go substantially over because they don't have the experience in delivering the same standard, and just in the settings that where there was a lot of unknowns, so it wasn't necessarily the contractor's fault and things like that, but just looking at something like this and ensuring that it works to prove the model for further construction and operations.
All right, all in favor? Any opposed? Councillor Cunningham is opposed. We'll move on. Report from Deputy City Manager. Whoops, we did that. A report from the Deputy City Manager with regards to the McCarthy Building Construction Award. That Council receives the report and awards Coast Tsimshian Northern Contractors Alliance the next phase of the Progressive Design Build contract for the McCarthy Building, RFP 240008. And I have a motion to that effect. Councillor Skelton Morven, is there a seconder? Councillor Rundawa. Any discussion? Councillor Cunningham.
How many bids do we receive on this?
DCM Pucci.
So this project was put out earlier this year as a design build project, and I believe we received 3. three bids for it. So this is the second part of the original bid that went out earlier this year. So it was a design build a contract that started earlier this year. And I believe we did three, and it would have. I can get that for council to be sure exactly who went forward with it.
Well, you know,
Councillor
the
Cunningham.
design build was passed, and the original design build was going to be 75,000. We ended up revising it to 365,000, if I recall correctly. And then on the second, we had to revise that. And then, you know, now this is for a second building, a new building. So putting all our cards on the table, this doesn't include the mechanicals for the actual McCarthy building or any of the upgrades in that, does it? Is this part of the $6 million we're?
Yeah.
That's the
Councillor, I
final-
encourage you to ask that question towards me.
Okay, yeah. So
I know it's hard.
but you know, like, is this the final figure for the building? Everything, the HVAC and everything?
DCM Pucci.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, it is. So we have it's the same sort of structure as the RCMP, where they come up with a price, and then we work against that price. So it includes the renovation to the existing McCarthy building and building a secondary building. There was always a contemplated large addition to the building, but the way that it was looked at with code compliance is that if it stayed as an addition, the original building would have to be brought up in several code compliances, including larger staircases and other things. So by separating that off, it allows the renovation to the existing building to be less, because it's for the use that it is already used for, and then the offices and everything will be in a separate standalone building beside it, and that also brings on more square footage as well. So we're getting more square footage for that money.
Any other questions from council? All in favor? Any opposed? It is carried. We move on to bylaws. Bylaw number 8A, City of Prince Rupert Official Community Plan Amendment Bylaw, with a recommendation that council give third reading the Official Community Plan Amendment Bylaw number 3541. Can I have a motion? Councillors Nish and Randhawa, thank you. Any questions? This is the one that deals with the official community plan amendment that we were trying to do out of order previously. All right. Hearing no questions, all in favor? Any opposed? It is carried. Again, just for the sake of the public, this would facilitate the rezoning of the property to allow for a 5 to 6 story building in that location. And again, that's Lakwalum's apartment building right across from the Save on Food location. All right, item number 8B is City of Prince Rupert Official Community Plan Amendment Bylaw number 3542, with a recommendation that council give third reading to the Official Community Plan Amendment Bylaw number 3542, and that is the area that I just referred to as the gravel pit down. Moved. Councillor Adie, is there a seconder? Councillor Skelton Morven. Dr. Buchan.
Your worship, just a quick note that item 7B, which was the development variance permit, we're going to recommend that go on the next agenda.
Okay, thank you. All right. Moved and seconded. Any questions? All in favor? Opposed? It is carried. And now the Northwest BC Regional Funding Agreement Reserve Bylaw number 3547, recommendation that council introduce and give fourth and final reading to the Northwest BC Regional Funding Agreement Reserve Bylaw number 3547. Can I have a motion to that effect? Councillor Adie, Councillor Cunningham. Again, for the sake of people watching at home, this is establishing an account so that we can receive the funds from what we call the RBA, the Resource Benefit Alliance, $6.8 million, something in that neighborhood. It was a requirement that we have to set up a special fund to receive that money. All in favor? Any opposed? It is carried. Council, this is your moment. Council roundtable. Any items? Councillor Adey.
I just have one, and we're going to return to Moresby Park for a different question.
All right.
I fielded a concern from a constituent about the condition of the trail for walking. It was getting quite overgrown, and I think more particularly for the slope and roughness of one of the walkways down. I think from the Park Avenue side, you go from the upper trail down to where the salmon, the bridge across the stream is, and that was getting rough. And I did forward that to DCM Pucci. I'm just curious as to where we are with that.
DCM Pucci.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That has been passed on as a service request to our Public Works Department. We are looking at it, and I don't have a report right now, but I can get something back to council.
Great. Dr. Buck.
Your worship, I apologize. We're going to ask council to go back to item 8A. It's actually a fourth reading that is being requested at this point. That's a typo that says third reading,
Okay.
and that clarifies that we can then do the DVP following.
Got it. All right. We are now, everybody clear? We're going back to item 8A. The City of Prince Rupert Official Community Plan Amendment Bylaw number 3541 with the recommendation that council give fourth and final reading to the Official Community Plan Amendment Bylaw number 3541. Councillor Skelton Morvan, Councillor Niche, any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? It is carried. Would you like to go right to 7A? All right. Oh, 7B. Okay. Right. 7B. Report from Planning DVP 2406 for 836 3rd Avenue West with a recommendation that council proceed to final approval of development variance permit 2406. Right? Okay. All in favor? Oh, yeah, mover and second. Thank you very much. Councillor Adey, is there a seconder? Councillor Skelton Morvan. All in favor? Any opposed? It is carried. Thank you very much. All right. Council, we're back to you. Any comments or questions from council? Councillor Cunningham.
Let's get back to the McCarthy building for a minute.
Yes.
This almost $6 million. Well, it's over $6 million when you put the design and everything into that. Is that all coming out of Legacy? Because the design money was coming out of Legacy.
I believe it is all coming out of a Legacy, but let's have a confirmation. Dr. Bucket.
Your worship, I'm not certain that it is. I think it's something that we're still working on, but I will ask Director Bauman to speak to that.
Director Bombin.
We need to look at where we can find funding for it, and we will bring forward a budget amendment.
Okay, now the other thing is if and when, or well, not if, but when we do, when will the purchase of that building be finalized?
Dr. Buchan.
We'll address that in the same report, hopefully.
Seeing as we're spending this kind of money on a building.
Yeah. Listen, I think, the McCarthy building, to be fair, has attracted a fair bit of attention, unwanted attention. I wasn't part of the council that made the decision, so I perhaps have a luxury of commenting from a different vantage point. I think the decision was the right decision. I reviewed it. I think it was the right decision. It is still the cheapest path to addressing the multiple health and safety issues that the current site faces. I mean, as an employer, we have a responsibility. It's not something you can just kind of wave off. And so I think it was the cheapest, quickest path. Nobody at the time anticipated COVID. Nobody anticipated that all of our pipes would blow, and that would become the focus of our immediate efforts. And while we've had tremendous success on those fronts, it has definitely delayed this move into this building far longer than anybody wanted, including the employees who go to work every day at the really substandard conditions in the yard. And so I appreciate that the public looks at an empty building that we're paying a lease payment on and says, why, right? I also believe that once people have moved in and it is being used and our employees are in the right place to do their work, that we may actually achieve some efficiencies, but more than that, it will all make sense and people will feel just fine about. I believe 10 years from now, people look back and say that was a great move. But I do appreciate the public concern. Councillor Nish.
I'll just add one piece to that, and the piece that wasn't mentioned is that the intention was to purchase the building from day one,
right?
But we had to lease it to start. So I think a lot of people are upset because they see a lease payment going into something that we're not using. But at the end of the day, the lease and the purchase are tied together, and so leasing it first and then purchasing it, it's all part of one big number.
Yeah,
right?
Which is not uncommon in commercial transactions.
Yeah, and so I just think that needs to be, obviously we've had a lot of people, voice their opinions against it, and everyone's entitled to their opinion. But at the end of the day, it's still, even when you throw the lease and the purchase together, it's still more economical for us to do what we're doing now versus building a brand new building. So,
Councillor Cunningham.
I tend to agree with both Councillor Neese and Mayor Pond. I think in the end, it's a good thing. It's just that there's been a lot of misconception, unknown figures, and it started out at $750,000 for the renovation. Now we're up to $6 million. It's still a bargain. Right. Don't get me wrong, right. But it's just a lot of people don't understand it, and it's hasn't been put out there in the public, and it's quite a hot topic simply because you drive by a building and nothing's going on. And I agree with you. Like I think when we made the original decision, it was the right decision. It's just we've got to get these figures out to the public so they understand.
Yep. And one of the things I appreciate in the report from DCM Pucci is that we'll be ideally moving some staff into that building before Christmas. And I'm sure for everybody involved, can't come soon enough. Any other comments or questions from council? Councillor Skelton-Moore.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that conversation, and I think when the challenge around obviously matters regarding land, legal, and labor, we cannot put all of it out there right away. There's a lot of times we're having to make decisions well in advance to kind of secure spaces. So for us looking at that, as Councillor Leach had mentioned, this stuff is tied together. It's we're playing chess, not checkers here. I think a lot of the times, we put things in motion. It does take a while to implement. Sometimes there's delays. There are things that come up. And as we all know, the social media is the Wild West, which brings it into my second point that I want to wrap up with. It's one thing for folks to rebel rouse and stir the pot and get riled up on social media. But when people come into council chambers to bring up their concerns, there's a standard of operations, but also a standard of, how do I say this, professionalism, and not raising your voice and yelling at members of council or staff or name calling or, and critiquing in a rather insulting way. And for me personally, I haven't been insulted economically since my time dealing with housing petitioners trying to block a housing project. So for me, this is not the first time we've had this particular encounter, but I would like to reinforce that we continue to have a standard of code of conduct when folks come to voice their opinions. I know a lot of the times emotions are charged and things like that, but if it's a recurring thing and that standard seems to be very passively maintained, not to say that we're trying to discourage folks from coming and having conversations with us, but it's just, if it's a recurring thing with the same person and different things like that, I think we need to really start to hold that piece accountable so that kind of stuff doesn't happen. I think everybody deserves to feel safe in this space and things like that. And even having presenters come in and having things said afterwards that were, again, completely out of left field and not on topic or not even well informed for that matter. But that's again is ultimately up to the discretion of the code of conduct. But I imagine, again, holding that standard, I think, is going to be important.
I think we should all hold ourselves to a very high standard in this room. If there's nothing else, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. Councillor Cunningham, Councillor Adie, all in favor? Any opposed? It's carried. Thank you very much.